The Urantia book, Section 1, the central and super universes, God's relation to the individual, Part 1. And it is paper 5. If the finite mind of man is unable to comprehend how so great and so majestic a God as the Universal Father can descend from his eternal abode in infinite perfection to fraternize with the individual human creature, then must such a finite intellect rest assurance of divine fellowship upon truth of the fact that an actual fragment of the living God resides within the intellect of every normal-minded and morally conscious Urantia mortal. The indwelling thought adjusters are a part of the eternal deity of the Paradise Father. It is the God the Father fragment in us. Man does not have to go farther than his own inner experience of the soul's contemplation of the spiritual reality, presence, to find God and attempt communion with him. God has distributed the infinity of his eternal nature throughout the existential realities of his 6 absolute co-ordinates, but he may at any time make direct personal contact with any part or phase or kind of creation through the agency of his prepersonal fragments. And the eternal God has also reserved to himself the prerogative of bestowing personality upon the divine creators and the living creatures of the universe of universes, while he has further reserved the prerogative of maintaining direct and parental contact with all these personal beings through the personality circuit. 1. The approach to God. The inability of the finite creature to approach the infinite Father is inherent not in the Father's aloofness, but in the finiteness and material limitations of created beings. The magnitude of the spiritual difference between the highest personality of universe existence and the lower groups of created intelligences is inconceivable. Were it possible for the lower orders of intelligence to be transported instantly into the presence of the Father himself, they would not know they were there. They would dare be just as oblivious as the presence of the Universal Father as where they now are. And that is true because the majority of God's children are living in oblivion here on Urantia. There is a long, long road ahead of mortal man before he can consistently and within the realms of his possibility ask for a safe conduct into the paradise presence of the Universal Father. So this here clearly stated, there is a long, long, long road ahead of mortal man before he can consistently and within the realms of possibility ask for a safe conduct into the paradise presence of the Universal Father. So this means that what the book of Revelation declares is actually incorrect, that when all the darkness and evilness is shoved away from this world Urantia, then every person, every mortal is just in a millisecond a perfect spiritual human being. Which cannot be true, of course, because if it were such simple, and God doesn't want the qualities that we have in his paradise, which is what I refer to as the animal human beingness qualities. So he will not allow us in his paradise, and then that we ruin his paradise? No. Spiritually, man must be translated many times before he can attain a plane that will yield the spiritual vision, which will enable him to see even any one of the 7 master spirits, in whom they are. We will find out as we prolong and go forth our journey through the Urantia book, which I call actually the Urantia travel guide. Our Father is not in hiding. He is not in arbitrary seclusion. He has mobilized the resources of divine wisdom in a never-ending effort to reveal himself to the children of his universal domains, which is not only us, but all the inhabitants of all the worlds, not only in this local universe Nebadon, but also outside, in the super universes and in the central universes, and later on even in the outer space realms. There is an infinite grandeur and an inexpressible generosity connected with the majesty of his love, which causes him to yearn for the association of every created being who can comprehend, love, or approach him, and it is therefore the limitation inherent in you, inseparable from your finite personality. And material existence that determine the time and place and circumstances in which you may achieve the goal of the journey of mortal ascension and stand in the presence of the Father at the center of all things. Although the approach to the paradise presence of the Father must await your attainment of the highest finite levels of spirit progression. So our spirit needs to progress into such a way that we are able to meet the Father in paradise. You should rejoice in the recognition of the ever-present possibility of immediate communion with the bestowal spirit of the Father, so intimately associated with your inner soul and your spiritualizing self. Because it's not really said that as we die, our soul fuses with the adjuster in an instant. Sometimes that can take place in a later moment if you are walking through dimension worlds. Depends also on how far you have developed your soul here in the mortal realm. The mortals of the realms of time and space may differ greatly in innate abilities and intellectual endowment. They may enjoy environments exceptionally favorable to social advancement and moral progress, or they may suffer from the lack of almost every human aid to culture and supposed advancement in the arts of civilization. But the possibilities for spiritual progress in the ascension career are equal to all. Increasing levels of spiritual insight and cosmic meanings are attained quite independently of all such social moral differentials of the diversified material environments on the evolutionary worlds. However, Urantia mortals may differ in their intellectual, social, economic, and even moral opportunities and endowments. Forget not that their spiritual endowment is uniform and unique. They all enjoy the same divine presence of the gift from the Father, and they are all equally privileged to seek intimate personal communion with this indwelling spirit of divine origin, while they may all equally choose to accept the uniform spiritual leading of these mystery monitors. But it doesn't grant that everyone becomes, it doesn't say, because we have this free will, which I have so many things with to understand that idea. We have this free will, so if you by the age of 5 get these mystery monitors and whatever adjuster, this thought adjuster, it doesn't mean that you directly are becoming a being that wants to see God and wants to understand God. This is something that needs to come from real spiritual will, from your spirit will, that you truly want to discover God, that you truly want to know whom God the Father is, that you want to meet Him, in any way, shape, or form in this mortal realm. That you say, God the Father, I do this prayer to you. I want to meet you in this mortal realm in such a way that I can understand, which means that I want to see you working in my life, in the situations that I go through, that I want to see your presence in every single thing that I do. And not only do, also think and say. But this is something that needs to come from your spirit willing. Your spirit longs and hungers to seek God and to find God and to get to know God. And that's the whole thing. And as we now look in the world, then we must come to the conclusion that not many are really seeking God. Because all those who go once a week to a church, do some act that is being called worship, we can say that all of them are really seeking God. There are amongst them who do, but you can't say that all of them are doing such a thing. Because there are also a lot of brothers and sisters joining church. Why? Because you have to do so. And they are not really in the willingness to do this because some auntie or neighbor or whom else has brought them to church, and they were like, okay, well, then I go do this. So if mortal man is wholeheartedly spiritually motivated, unreservedly consecrated to the doing of the Father's will, and this is exactly the main key. If your spirit truly wants to do the Father's will, it will do the Father's will. And then it will experience God the Father in all the things it does and do and says and thinks and sees and feels. But if you do not do His will, and I know that there are believers who experience God in their life because they do His will. But the majority of God's children, unfortunately here on Urantia, still refuse to do the Father's will. And so that is why we have this chaos as we are in. Then, since he is so certainly and so effectively spiritually endowed by the indwelling and divine adjuster, there cannot there cannot fail to materialize in that individual's experience the sublime consciousness of knowing God and the supernal assurance of surviving for the purpose of finding God by the progressive experience of becoming more and more like Him. And I do a prayer every day in which I ask God to become more and more like Him. God, by the progressive experience of becoming more and more like Him. So man is spiritually indwelt by a surviving thought adjuster. So this is also interesting, because if you want to know God, it means that you are a spirit that truly wants to survive. If your spirit truly has this attitude, this deep will, this deep longing, this deep desire to survive, then it will do the will of the Father, because it knows by doing the will of God the Father, it survives. So man is spiritually indwelt by a surviving thought adjuster if such a human mind is sincerely and spiritually motivated. If such a human soul desires to know God, so it is your own spirit as well as your soul. That is very good to understand. So a human soul desires to know God and become like Him, honestly wants to do the Father's will. There exists no negative influence of mortal deprivation, nor positive power of possible interference, which can prevent such a divinely motivated soul from securely ascending to the portals of paradise. Wow! This is actually saying, by doing the will of God the Father, then all this so-called spiritual warfare that people are speaking about and do not understand what it truly is, stops. Why? Because you are doing God the Father's will, which means that you are going and are willing, and that you also are willing to surrender to the path of life of God Himself. That is actually doing the will of the Father. So that you are walking His path, just like Jesus did. Jesus was walking the path of the Father. So by doing His will. Same for us. If we do, and if we are willing to do the will of God the Father, and if we are truly surrendering ourselves to the will of the Father, then we are start to walk the path of God the Father. And then all this so-called spiritual warfare is not at play anymore. Because this so-called spiritual warfare, what I come to understand more and more by asking questions and pondering upon it, and by also progressing more and more through this book, better said through this travel guide known as Urantia book, I get more and more a different idea about spiritual warfare. And I truly think that this whole spiritual warfare is based on fighting creatures that are actually developed in our subconsciousness and are developed due to all the traumatization that we went through ourselves, and due to the traumatization that we got inherited. And then eventually, if we do not solve these trauma wounds, then these these emotions, the experiences, these thoughts are starting to live their own life, so to speak, and that is actually what we're fighting. Why I'm saying this? Because Jesus is saying in section 4 of this travel guide Urantia book, in which you can all learn about the life and teachings of Jesus. Jesus himself says when he was at Mount Hermon, before he got baptized by John the Baptist, he dealt with Satan and Caligustia, who Caligustia is our former planetary prince. Satan was not only sitting there on that mount on behalf of itself, but also on behalf of Lucifer, that was by that time already in a prison world. It doesn't speak that the right hand of Caligustia, whose name is Daligustia, is wiped off from this planet and in a prison planet. So it can be that Daligustia is still here and is still roaring his hand in the earth things here. That's something that is not really clearly spoken of. But anyways, in that moment, these three beings, because Jesus said to his Father, he made a petition. Actually, he asked the Father if he could deal for once and for all with these beings. And then the Father gave him permission to do so. So Satan and Caligustia were there on Mount Hermon, and Satan was also sitting there on behalf of Lucifer. So he was already actually dealing with that for once and for all. So this whole story that Jesus got into the depth and into the darkest of the darkest to find the keys and whatever, that is a nice story, but that's not really correct. So if you are doing really the will of God the Father, are really surrendering yourselves to God the Father's will, then your life is completely in protection, because his hand is constantly on you. But it disappears if you eventually choose to say, nah, I'm going my own way. Then he withdraws from himself, still will be at the background, because God shall never leave us completely. He shall never forsake us. The fact that fast time is involved in the attainment of God makes the presence and personality of the infinite none the less real. Your ascension is a part of the circuit of the 7 super universes. I think I'm okay, go on. I need to go back a little bit. The Father desires all his creatures to be in personal communion with him. He has on paradise a place to receive all those whose survival status and spiritual nature make possible such attainment. Therefore, settle in your philosophy now and forever. To each of you and to all of us, God is approachable, the Father is attainable, the way is open. The forces of divine love and the ways and means of divine administration are all interlocked in an effort to facilitate the advancement of every worthy intelligence of every universe to the paradise presence of the Universal Father. The fact that vast time is involved in the attainment of God makes the presence and personality of the infinite none the less real. Your ascension is a part of the circuit of the 7 super universes, and though you swing around it countless times, you may expect in spirit and in status to be ever swinging inward. You can depend upon being translated from sphere to sphere, from the outer circuits ever nearer the inner center, and someday, doubt not, you shall stand in the divine and central presence and see him, figuratively speaking, face to face. It is a question of the attainment of actual and literal spiritual levels, and these spiritual levels are attainable by any being who has been indwelt by a mystery monitor, and who has subsequently eternally fused with that thought adjuster. So the Father is not in spiritual hiding, but so many of his creatures have hidden themselves away in the midst of their own willful decisions, and for the time being have separated themselves from the communion of his Spirit and the Spirit of his Son by the choosing of their own perverse ways and by the indulgence of the self-assertiveness of their intolerant minds and unspiritual natures. Mortal man may draw near God and may repeatedly forsake the divine will so long as the power of choice remains. Man's final doom is not sealed until he has lost the power to choose the Father's will. There is never a closure of the Father's heart to the need and the petition of his children. Only do his offspring close their hearts forever to the Father's drawing power when they finally and forever lose the desire to do his divine will, to know him and to be like him. Likewise is man's eternal destiny assured when at juster fusion proclaims to the universe that such a ascender has made the final and irrevocable choice to live the Father's will. The great God makes direct contact with mortal man and gives a part of his infinite and eternal and incomprehensible self to live and dwell within him. God has embarked upon the eternal adventure with man. If you yield to the leadings of the spiritual forces in you and around you, you cannot fail to attain the high destiny established by a loving God as the universe goal of his ascendant creatures from the evolutionary worlds of space. Then we go to 2. The presence of God. The physical presence of the infinite is the reality of the material universe. The mind presence of deity must be determined by the depth of individual intellectual experience and by the evolutionary personality level. The spiritual presence of divinity must of necessity be differential in the universe. It is determined by the spiritual capacity of receptivity and by the degree of the consecration of the creature's will to the doing of the divine will. God lives in every one of his spirit-born sons. The paradise sons always have access to the presence of God, the right hand of the Father, and all of his creature personalities have access to the bosom of the Father. This refers to the personality circuit whenever, wherever, and however contacted or otherwise entails personal self-conscious contact and communion with the Universal Father, whether at the central abode or at some other designated place, as on one of the 7 sacred spheres of paradise. The divine presence cannot, however, be discovered anywhere in nature or even in the lives of God-knowing mortals so fully and so certainly as in your attempted communion with the indwelling mystery monitor, the paradise thought adjuster. What a mistake to dream of God far off in the skies when the Spirit of the Universal Father lives within your own mind. And this is the deception of the whole book of Revelation, that then Jesus comes on a cloud, and because Jesus represents God, so comes onto a cloud, picks us up and brings us onto a cloud, and then is cleaning up the earth, and then is bringing us down on the earth, and then we are in God's kingdom, because in the meantime Jesus also realized God's kingdom, and then he goes back to this cloud where he has placed his children and brings them down. Well, that is not really how it works. It is because of this God fragment that indwells you that you can hope, as you progress in harmonizing with the adjuster's spiritual leadings, more fully to discern the presence and transforming power of those other spiritual influences that surround you and impinge upon you, but do not function as an integral part of you. The fact that you are not intellectually conscious of close and intimate contact with the indwelling adjuster does not in the least disprove such an exalted experience. The proof of fraternity with the divine adjuster consists wholly in the nature and extent of the fruits of the Spirit, which are yielded in the life experience of the individual believer. By their fruits you shall know them. It is exceedingly difficult for the meagerly spiritualized material mind of mortal man to experience marked consciousness of the spirit activities of such divine entities as the paradise adjusters. As the soul of joined mind and adjuster creation becomes increasingly existent, there also evolves a new phase of soul consciousness, which is capable of experiencing the presence and of recognizing the spirit leadings and other supermaterial activities of the mystery monitors. The entire experience of adjuster communion is one involving moral status, mental motivation, and spiritual experience. The self-realization of such an achievement is mainly, though not exclusively, limited to the realms of soul consciousness, but the proofs are forthcoming and abundant in the manifestation of the fruits of the Spirit in the lives of all such inner spirit contactors. Last, true worship, which is point 3. Though the paradise deities from the universe standpoint are as one in their spiritual relations with such beings as inhabit Urantia, they are also 3 distinct and separate persons. There is a difference between the Godheads in the matter of personal appeals, communion, and other intimate relations. In the highest sense, we worship the Universal Father and Him only. That is funny because many people say we need to worship Jesus. But actually here is stated the universal Father and Him only. So we need to worship the universal Father and Him only. True, we can and do worship the Father as He is manifested in His Creator sons, but it is the Father directly or indirectly who is worshipped and adored. Supplications of all kinds belong to the realm of the eternal Son and the Son's spiritual organization. Prayers, all formal communications, everything except adoration and worship of the universal Father, are matters that concern a local universe. They do not ordinarily proceed out of the realm of the jurisdiction of a Creator Son, but worship is undoubtedly encircuited and dispatched to the person of the Creator by the function of the Father's personality circuit. We further believe that such registry of the homage of an adjuster indwelt creature is facilitated by the Father's Spirit presence. There exists a tremendous amount of evidence to substantiate such a belief. And I know that all orders of Father fragments are empowered to register the bona fide adoration of their subjects acceptably in the presence of the universal Father. The adjusters undoubtedly also utilize direct prepersonal channels of communication with God, and they are likewise able to utilize the spirit gravity circuits of the eternal Son. Worship is for its own sake. Prayer embodies a self or creature interest element. That is the great difference between worship and prayer. There is absolutely no self-request or other element of personal interest in true worship. We simply worship God for what we comprehend Him to be. Worship asks nothing and expects nothing for the worshipper. This is interesting. I repeat this again. Worship asks nothing and expects nothing for the worshipper. We do not worship the Father because of anything we may derive from such veneration. And this is exactly what is going on nowadays with all these so-called worship teams in churches. It's actually a type of worship that's being done so that the believers, have done their duty for that week and have spent some time with to the Father. Well, better said, have given some of their time to the Father, because that is the only amount of time that they want to give. So, and then they start to do worship under guidance of a worship team, but it's not the type of worship that the Father is looking for. We render such devotion and engage in such worship as a natural and spontaneous reaction to the recognition of the Father's matchless personality and because of His lovable nature and adorable attributes. So worship needs to be natural and spontaneous. Well, going to church each and every Sunday and doing some idea of worship, that is not natural, that is not spontaneous at all. It's all pre-programmed. Even the songs that are being sung are already selected for that morning service. So there's nothing natural nor any spontaneity. It is what is natural and spontaneous worship. That's when for example, you walk somewhere in a place in nature and all of a sudden you start to see it, yeah, and then you have something, wow, and then you say, oh wow, Father, thank you for the creation of this beautiful surroundings and this beautiful nature. That is spontaneous worship that comes from your spirit, your soul, that wants to adore the Father for what it is experiencing at that moment. That is natural and spontaneous worship. That is a natural and spontaneous reaction. The moment the element of self-interest intrudes upon worship, that instant devotion translates from worship to prayer, and more appropriately should be directed to the person of the eternal Son or the Creator Son. But in practical religious experience, there exists no reason why prayer should not be addressed to God the Father as a part of true worship. When you deal with the practical affairs of your daily life, you are in the hands of the spirit personalities having origin in the third source and center. The third source and center, that is the infinite spirit. Who is the one that has created the Holy Spirit? Because the infinite spirit is the circuitry of the Holy Spirit and also of the Spirit of truth and wisdom. The second source and center is the eternal Son, Creator Son. But anyways, later on, far more of this. You are cooperating with the agencies of the conjoined actor. Conjoined actor is the same as the infinite spirit. Agencies you can see as circuits. And so it is, you worship God, pray to and commune with the Son, and work out the details of your earthly sojourn in connection with the intelligence of the infinite spirit, operating on your world and throughout your universe. The Creator or sovereign sons who preside over the destinies of the local universe stand in the place of both the universal Father and the eternal Son of paradise. These universe sons receive in the name of the Father the adoration of worship and give ear to the pleas of their petitioning subjects throughout their respective creations. To the children of a local universe, a Michael Son is to all practical intents and purposes, God. He is the local universe personification of the universal Father and the eternal Son. The infinite spirit maintains personal contact with the children of these realms through the universe spirits, the administrative and creative associates of the paradise creator sons. Sincere worship connotes the mobilization of all the powers of the human personality under the dominance of the evolving soul and subject to the divine directionization of the associated thought adjuster. The mind of material limitations can never become highly conscious of the real significance of true worship. Man's realization of the reality of the worship experience is chiefly determined by the developmental status of his evolving immortal soul. The spiritual growth of the soul takes place wholly independently of the intellectual self-consciousness. The worship experience consists in the sublime attempt of the betrothed adjuster to communicate to the Divine Father the inexpressible longings and the unutterable aspirations of the human soul, the conjoined creation of the God-seeking mortal mind and the God-revealing immortal adjuster. Worship is therefore the act of the material mind's assenting to the attempt of its spiritualizing self under the guidance of the associated spirit to communicate with God as a faith son of the universal Father. The mortal mind consents to worship, the immortal soul craves and initiates worship. The divine adjuster presence conducts such worship in behalf of the mortal mind and the evolving immortal soul. True worship in the last analysis becomes an experience realized on 4 cosmic levels: the intellectual, the morontial, the spiritual, and the personal. The consciousness of mind, soul, and spirit, and their unification in personality. And with this said, I have come to the end of the first 3 sub-chapters of paper 5, which is all about God's relation to the individual. In part 2, we are going to learn more about God in religion and the consciousness of God, and then the God of personality, and that was it. So with this said, thank you so much for listening to this audio video, and God bless you.